Today, we're going to be talking about the rise of ransomware. My name is Mark Ruiz. I'm Executive Director in GRC for Comcast. So this is my first CyberSEED. I'm looking forward to the rest of the conference, and I believe I'm also moderating another panel tomorrow, so you'll get used to my face. So I just want to go and introduce my panel and have them just introduce themselves. To my immediate right is Mike Mullen. To his right is David Corlette. And to his right is James Trainor. So Mike, if you could kick us off with intro.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. My name is Mike Mullen. I'm the Vice President of Security Services with Looking Glass. It may say Cyveillance in the agenda, but Cyveillance was acquired by Looking Glass, which is a cybersecurity solutions company. We're located in Reston, Virginia. Joined Looking Glass in 2014, and prior to coming on board, I was with the Secret Service for 25 years.
I'm David Corlette. I'm a Director of Product Management for ThreatTrack Security, and we make malware analysis and host and network-based malware detection solutions. Happy to be here. I'm really excited to be at CyberSEED.
I'm Jim Trainor. I'm formerly the Assistant Director for the FBI's Cyber Division. I retired about 3 weeks ago after 20 years of working with the FBI. The last 3.5 years I was responsible for the Cyber Division, which is the entity that's responsible for all cyber intrusion investigations that the FBI has at any point in time. So glad to be here. I also graduated from the University of Connecticut about 23 years ago, so I'm proud to come back anytime I can, so thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. So not to make any assumptions, ransomware is a variant of malware. It's essentially evolved from disruption to encryption of a system. So you might have a grandmother that clicked on a link and suddenly there's a prompt asking her for $200 or $2,000 in Bitcoin, and she has no idea what that means. So these gentlemen are going to help me kind of talk about some trends in the industry, some things that you might think and consider about, some of the challenges related to ransomware and kind of how it's evolved over the last 2-3 years. So I want to start off with just a broad macro question, as these panels typically start off with, and hopefully we'll just get a good banter going. And then I'm looking to leave the last 5 or so, 10 minutes for Q&A as well. So looking forward to those questions. So I think I want to kick off, Mike, if you want to just talk about what you're seeing in terms of trends across the industry, certain segments of the industry that you're seeing that are being kind of attacked, so to speak, by malware, and maybe the last thing to include on that, what are your thoughts on who those threat actors are?
Thanks, Mark. I think your initial comment there, talking about the analogy of a grandmother clicking on a link, and then that window pops open and says we've captured or seized your files. Kind of goes to the beginning of what we know as ransomware. Hasn't been around that much. When I was in the service, it wasn't an area that we were really actively investigating. There were other issues in cybercrime that we were focused on. But you start, I think, with the small mom and pop, the small businesses that the actors kind of tested their products on. And there's kind of, I think, been a steady evolution to local and state municipalities. You see some of their data being seized. You read about it with more and more frequency. And then during the last 6 months, I think you've seen a steady trend where the healthcare industry, hospitals in California, hospitals in Texas, hospital in Washington right around the corner from where we are, in MedStar. And those are all treasure troves for the actors who are targeting them, because they understand the value of the data that's there, the urgency that the customer has to get access to that data again so they can continue with their business operations. And one of the growing trends that we're seeing now, as the malware continues to spread and the variants continue to spread from east to west, I think is a focus on the educational systems. So you're seeing universities in Europe and the UK being targeted over there, and we look to see that migration probably continue here in the United States. Because again, universities are a treasure trove of information. There's intellectual property there, there's research and development there. Their networks are set up in an environment where they allowed for more free and open exchange of information. And there's also the users of those networks, their emails and their identities are more readily accessible. So that's a trend I think you're going to see more and more cases here in the United States focus or become victims of the ransomware in the educational industry.
Okay, thank you. And David or Jim, any other additional thoughts on that?
So from my perspective, ransomware really started off probably, I mean, it's been around for a while, but 2014 really started to see more of the activity, starting off with CryptoLocker, and many of you may be familiar with CryptoLocker and the evolution of where that is now. A gentleman by the name of Yevgeny Bogachev was also responsible for the Game Over Zeus botnet. 2015 and 2016, we've seen a substantial increase, particularly in the first half of 2016. We collect a lot of data based upon the reported entities, whether it's an organization or an individuals, and the numbers looking for 2016 are close to $1 billion worth of extortion attempts, ransom attempts from these actors. There's dozens of variants of ransomware with various different capabilities. There were 5 principal ones that we were looking at when I retired, really, which was CryptoWall, CTB Locker, Tesla Crypt, something called MSIL, SAMIS, we call it SamSam, and then Locky. These are the 5 principal main active ransomwares that were out there in various FBI offices. We're looking at that, really trying to figure out how the entities that are responsible for targeting them. I totally agree with Mike. There's essentially every sector is potentially targeted by ransomware. It's really very indiscriminate in that respect. The evolution really, in addition to the volume of activity, also in terms of how you pay the ransom if you choose to do that, and I speak for probably everybody here, we don't encourage doing that, but we recognize it happens. But really the use of Tor, the use of Bitcoin, and other ways to obfuscate the entities that are responsible for these ransomware attack. That's not something we didn't really see that in 2014, certainly before then. That's an evolution, that's a 2015, 2016. So we will continue to see that more and more where individuals are getting targeted and the ability to pay and the ability of law enforcement or the private sector to identify who's responsible for this will be more challenging.
I'll just add on top of that, in addition to the more targets and more frequency, just the diversity of techniques that people are using to plant ransomware in people's systems, and then the action they take afterwards. It's not just locking your screen or encrypting your files. Now people are threatening to release embarrassing information on the internet instead of deleting it, or they're targeting web servers, not individual desktops. So we're seeing just much more creativity and diversity as it becomes more profitable, more effort and more energy is put into creating ransomware. And in my company, we process over 1 million malware samples a day, and that number just goes up exponentially year after year. So we don't really see an end in sight for that, and so we really need to come up with some creative solutions.
Okay, thank you. So thinking about the challenges, what are some guidance that you would give to not just individuals, but also organizations more broadly? Where should they spend their time in terms of, protecting themselves, so to speak, from malware, so ransomware?
So some of the principal thing, if you don't remember anything, from my perspective, is remember to have safe, secure backups. Ransomware is all about backups. If you're infected and your data, all your hosts across your network are impacted, if you have a safe, separate, and secure backup, it's easy to get back up and running. A lot of companies clearly don't, and as such, they put themselves in a very difficult spot. So, that's, in my mind, probably there's a lot of other things, application whitelisting, patch management, whether it's, all of the traditional types of things, educating your workforce all matter, but without a doubt, safe, secure, separate backups are really critical.
I'll add to that as well. I absolutely agree on the backup front, although like I said, there are some different motivations and different threats coming down the pike. And we also believe user education and training, just making sure people know not to click on things. And if Word pops something up and says, hey, do you want to enable macros? Don't say yes if you don't trust the source. There are a lot of, tons of AV solutions in the market and anti-ransomware, anti-malware solutions in the market. Definitely be aware that most of the classic techniques are no longer effective. All the signature-based techniques and simple heuristic-based techniques don't work anymore because the malware itself has become more stealthy and polymorphic and metamorphic. So you need to be looking at more creative things like behavioral detection and more advanced machine learning-based techniques to detect malware properly, specifically ransomware. We've had some very good luck with some of the newer algorithms, as have other companies. But just going out and buying off-the-shelf AV from any vendor may not have the capabilities that you require. So definitely look into the ratings agencies and all the things that test these products, and select ones that perform well, specifically against the newer kinds of zero-day exploits and zero-day malware.
And Mark, I think I agree with both of Jim and Dave's points. I think one of the challenges you have as security professionals is at the beginning is trying to convince your own organization the need for the security measures to put in place. What is the argument that you can use to get funding and to get attention? And that's the challenge that we start with at the beginning. The return on investment, what are you going to see that for? What is going to be the disruption to the continuity of business and all the regulatory issues that you have to deal with when you're talking about implementing some of these measures and the different I think pieces that you could build into your security plan. It costs money, and it starts with trying to make an argument and looking at the numbers, looking at the trends, saying that this is how our business is going to be impacted. Again, it's just a little bit different spin on the same topic that we're talking about here. But unless you have the funding and the backing of leadership, regardless of the size of an organization, you're not going to be able to take the steps to implement some of these things that we're talking about here.
So what do you think the variants, what's the next, evolution of ransomware?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that one, but it's a little hard to predict. Maybe a better way to approach that question is that one of the things that I was most concerned with ransomware attacks is, it's one thing if it's a small business, and there's been small businesses, police departments, law firms, hospitals, schools. The one that was most concerning to me were, I kind of almost had like a no school, no hospital policy. Those are the two that really troubled me the most, but most importantly with hospitals, because most of the attacks you saw, particularly the ones on MedStar and others, really involved the business side of systems. So it was really the payroll system, the payment system, to some degree medical record systems, but not medical devices, really things that kind of impact the hospital's business but didn't necessarily impact the patients. So when we start seeing that, and quite frankly, the configuration of hospitals' networks varies dramatically, and the level of sophistication, I'm sure, varies dramatically. So my concern is long-term, if hospitals continue to be indiscriminately targeted, that it is going to impact patients' care, and quite frankly, it could impact potentially the loss of life of patients. And a cyber investigation all of a sudden becomes essentially a homicide investigation. So I think those are the critical areas, whether it's hospitals, if we start seeing the energy sector or the transportation sector or the financial services sector, by not necessarily a bank, because some of the banks get targeted every day and they generally have a no payment policy. They'll just clean up the network, clean up their hosts that are impacted. So I think the evolution probably will be more on those significant sectors because the likelihood of potentially getting paid isn't greater. So rather than hitting everybody here's computer, why don't I just go after the big payday? Because we've seen that in other types of attacks, whether it's business email compromise or extortion types of attacks, where I'd rather get a larger return on my investment rather than getting 2 Bitcoins per attack. So anyway, that's kind of an educated guess, I think.
I'll just say the potential is really quite frightening. I mean, just in Mr. Robot, there's larger societal impacts if we don't come up with some ways to protect ourselves. But think about the rise of IoT and how we're going to end up depending on these to run our lives. It's one thing if somebody breaks into your laptop and encrypts all your files, but what if they have control over your pacemaker and are ransom you for control of it? I mean, they're very frightening scenarios as we just computerize everything, and we're not doing a good job as an industry in making sure that we build those devices. It's impossible to build those things 100% securely, but one can build them more securely than they are being built. And so when you think about all the different aspects of how we run our lives and what we're computerizing and how they could be attacked, it could be anything. It could be very specialized, and it could be IoT or your automobiles or whatever it is, we could start to see threats like that.
And I think from my perspective, one of the things that we look at in our company is when we monitor the open source and the deep web for activist groups and how they are working together to target verticals, whether it's energy, the financial sector. We haven't seen so many or instances, I think, where these activist groups could potentially use a tool like ransomware and target a vertical, whether it's the energy vertical or environmental activist groups targeting a pipeline company in North Dakota. So I think, again, it's just an opinion on my part. I haven't seen any direct evidence, but I wouldn't be surprised if going forward you see activist groups using tools like ransomware to potentially cause disruption to companies that they're targeting for their political reasons.
So many victims of ransomware, whether it be individuals, but more importantly organizations, they don't tend to want to report unless they have a regulatory reason to do so. What are your thoughts on, as we've seen the rise of ISACs across the variety of industries, do you think they should kind of also include, some guidance related to that? And if so, what do you think that should be?
Well, I'll start off. I think absolutely. I mean, we can't know how large the problem is unless people report it. And if, just think of if an insurer is trying to set rates so that you can buy cybersecurity insurance, how can they set rates without knowing what the risk is? How can we know how many resources to dedicate to protecting ourselves if we don't know what the risk is? So there's a number of societal impacts in not reporting that tend to go ignored, and I think we need to address that as best we can.
Yeah, so reporting is very, very important. My sense from 3.5 years in the cyber division was that I probably saw about less than 10% of all of the incidents, whether they were nation-state actors or criminal actors, that just talking with industry and knowing the victims. So meaning that 90% of the intelligence that's out there from all these attacks, the FBI wasn't getting or the Secret Service wasn't getting, just because companies were concerned about a variety of issues, legal issues, liability issues, brand issues, customer issues, regulatory reactions, or enforcement action. I personally think it's a mistake not to report to law enforcement. I would say that now as a private citizen and soon to be working in private sector. I think there are advantages and there are authorities, and I quite frankly think this is a shared responsibility. It's a team sport that all victims have. It's not necessarily allowing the Secret Service or the FBI to come in and take ownership of the whole investigation, but the intelligence, the indicators of compromise, what information you can share to help others in the same sector is very, very important. And I use the Sony case as probably the principal example. When Sony suffered an attack in November of 2014, many companies in the entertainment industry were very eager to learn what happened with that attack, because they were concerned whether they would be attacked as well. And that happens in every breach. That the industry is, as quickly as we can get intelligence, whether it's malware, signatures, whether it's bad domains, URLs, email addresses, IPs, whatever, the better. So anyway, information sharing is a big part of it, without a doubt.
And I agree again with both of my colleagues up here. Human behavior, unless people are forced to comply with something, in many cases, corporations are not going to do that. And I agree with Jim. It's great. We were only so good, as good as we were, based on the information that our partners and at times victims shared with us. So I can see and I understand from the private sector standpoint that companies are reluctant to have their brand damaged, have their consumer confidence in their image damaged, and ultimately have their shares damaged as well. And that's one of those challenges that you face. I mean, either compelling them to provide the information, then they're self-disclosing, and it's having that negative impact on their business, or developing a mechanism where they see it's to everybody's benefit to contribute.
Thank you. So, question for the audience. I kind of wanted to start off the session with this, but has anyone been a victim of ransomware or have known someone, a family member or what have you? You want to raise your hands? Does anyone want to kind of speak to their experience and how they handled it? And then we can transition to some questions. Yeah? Can we get a microphone over here? on this table. Yep. Thank you.
Thanks. Sure. Over the past 3 weeks, I have two friends. One is the owner of a private small manufacturing company, was hit with ransomware, and interestingly, they hit a web server, and that's how they got it. So I don't think it was a direct attack because it's a very small company. They were asked to pay in Bitcoin, and he did all the research because he didn't know what the Bitcoin was. He contacted several companies. No one was able to help him, but he refused to pay. They contacted the FBI, so they did the knowledge sharing, and I thought that was really great. And they ended up reverting back to backup and then running through paper transactions for his business, which cost him way more than the Bitcoin ransom was. But he was very glad that he had a good IT partner running the systems for his company, that they actually had backup. And he was very happy with his staff that had kept all the paper transactions. So even though that we moved more and more to a digital world, he was really thankful that he had that. But he doesn't know how he would prevent it again. Everything was patched. You just have to educate your force and be really careful. The other one is a school, and they didn't want to be named. They didn't want to alert anyone, but they also ended up reverting back to backups. And so I think that advice is spot on. You have to have separate good backups, and again, there are tools out there that can help. It's limited, and it's an epidemic, right?
Did you have a question for the panel?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Yeah. I don't know where they stand with that. They still may be dealing with it. It just happened a few days ago, so I don't know if they have to. It's a private institution, so I don't know. I just know that they said don't say anything at this point in time. I don't want to, but I think they're still dealing with it.
So I will ask the question, and I will say, do I know someone? So I'm at Georgetown. Georgetown sold the hospital. It's the MedStar Hospital, even though it's MedStar Georgetown, and I see it out my window in my office. And MedStar spent well over 20, probably 50 times the amount of money recovering rather than paying the ransom. Which, if you took a quick look at that, you'd say, boy, they were stupid. They should have just paid the ransom. What can you say to people where, the rational choice would be? Because they set the bar pretty low. I was actually surprised at how little they were asking for, and it kind of made sense. Way easier to pay. What would you tell, especially a small business person, when to pay, when to, do the hard work?
I'll ask you a question. If you took the other action, you paid the ransom, would you feel that you had developed a trusting relationship with the criminal on the other side?
Actually, these are serious business people, and they are pretty good about not hitting the same place multiple times too often. So again,
I don't know if I would agree with that. I mean, the repeat victims I've seen, and it may not be the specific actor or group, but I think that the information that the vulnerability in that hospital or that facility was out there would probably be shared, and they would be targeted again. Not to say that it wouldn't have been patched or corrected, but I always feel it's difficult to, develop a relationship on beginning of a relationship on that kind of footing where it's tough ground. So that's why I would recommend not paying it. But I understand, why the leaders did.
And they didn't pay it.
Right.
Yeah, our policy was it's the FBI's policy not to recommend it. Certainly emboldens the criminals to continue targeting people, makes it profitable for them. As Mike indicated, there could be multiple actors. So if they paid this version of, say it was Locky, they may get hit up with Crypto Wall a couple of weeks later. Right now, depends upon, it varies, but generally from 2 Bitcoin to, I've seen 10, 15. I've also seen not necessarily ransomware, but extortion attacks that the price is $1 million, and it's not. You have this short window to make these business decisions, 48 hours, 72 hours. Another issue is the number of variants. and the complexity of the code associated with ransomware. So even if you pay, there are some that the code is written so poorly that the key that you get will not necessarily even unencrypt your data. So it is a dangerous business. Large companies, I think it's more likely that they will not pay than pay because they have the capital to do it. Small businesses, small law enforcement departments which have suffered data breaches, ransomware attacks, more likely that they're going to pay. But our position is always do not pay. But it is ultimately a business decision, and quite frankly, probably going to have very minimal impact on their regulatory or legal issues for the firm if they do pay. With the exception, if state-sponsored of terrorism starts to get involved in this and you pay the ransom and it goes back to ISIL, if for instance, if ISIL starts getting involved in the ransomware business, now you have a serious problem because now you're providing funds to a state sponsor of terrorism. So this is, again, very, very complicated business for folks, and I would encourage people not to go it alone, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So.
Next question. Jason, microphone's coming your way.
Could you describe a little bit how different law enforcement agencies work together and how they divide responsibilities when it comes to responding to, detecting, and supporting when one of these types of events happens?
Sure, I'll let...
Whoever got there first. We had
Well, so here's a nice little product that came out that has a lot of agencies on it. We pushed this out. The White House actually was involved, but it's a document that describes a lot of best practices and things that folks should do. So the FBI has, we have criminal cyber responsibilities as well as national security. So it really is, our portfolio is just larger. Secret Service has criminal jurisdiction and handles, and the principal statute is 18 in U.S. Code 1030. So these computer intrusion statutes, if it involves a 1030, a computer intrusion, Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, then either the FBI or the Secret Service. Service heavy, Mike can talk more about the service than I can, but heavily involved in POS stuff, great expertise. So, whether it's the Target, Home Depot, all these big significant cases. We have all the nation state stuff. Ransomware, I think really, both agencies are involved in the ransomware attack. Quite frankly, I don't really care who you call. I didn't care when I was in the FBI. I certainly don't care now. I'd rather have you call somebody. I'm not necessarily, when I was with the FBI, I wasn't looking for more work. I know the service wasn't looking for more work. We had too much as it is. So I would my recommendation is call the agency that you have a relationship with, you feel comfortable with dealing with. If that's a Secret Service agent, great. If it's an FBI agent, great. If it's either one of these companies and we're all working for down the road, that's great too. So I'll leave it to you.
How about is there anything at the local level, local police, more local government organizations that are there to help support either individuals or small businesses or local businesses?
No, not really. There are a couple of departments that are trying to build a capability. We have, the Secret Service does a lot of training. I'll let Mike talk about that. We do some cyber certification training for state and local law enforcement. But in order to, if we're talking about ransom, we're talking about computer intrusions, you need to call the Cyber Task Force for the FBI or the ECCTF for service.
And that's the way we did it through our local partners. We would establish regional electronic crimes task force. So we'd bring in the state and local law enforcement entities to participate in that. Now the likelihood that a local or state agency where you're located is participating, it's tough to say. Areas like New York, it's more robust. Washington's robust. New Haven, I'm not sure of the size and scope of it. But there are state and local agencies represented there. So if you contact the service or the bureau for one of those bigger field offices, they should be able to, I think, refer you to a local counterpart. And they actually, as Jim said, they participate, we provide training, we provide equipment, and the only ask is that they go out and just serve the public, bring the cases and the information back into the task force to work collectively.
Hi, I wanted to ask how much effort is made towards public awareness, because there are obviously clear steps that can be taken to minimize the risk. For example, use of virtual machines and virtual servers with a shadow backup that could pretty much wipe the attack off. Is there effort to educate the consumer or active effort?
Well, I'll just say that the examples you just mentioned, there's actually malware now that targets the shadow backup and things like your Apple time machine. So the attackers are wise to that as well. And I think part of the problem is that as a result, the advice keeps shifting to an extent. You know, oh, back up, but now you can't back up. Using that technique, you use a different technique. I know that as a vendor, we spend a lot of time trying to educate our customers because it is a real problem, and we have solutions that can help. But you know, from a public service perspective, you know, it's kind of not what we do. But what we've seen as a challenge is trying not to be fear-mongering, but you know, what's the right level of protection, and what are the simple, inexpensive steps you can take, at a consumer level or at a small business level. That's always a balance. You know, we don't want to just frighten people, but we do want people to have the right tools available to them. Yes.
Yeah, I could add a few things. So this past month and a half, the FBI and the Secret Service have teamed up to go out and do outreach at some of the events have been hosted in the Secret Service's offices, some in the FBI offices, to do public sector, private sector engagement on ransomware specifically. So they've hosted one-day type of events and sponsored different types of presentations during that time frame. There's also IC3.gov, which there's a whole host of documents, whether it's public service announcements that we pushed out. We also have key partners that we push out, something called a private industry notification. This document that I referred to as well was pushed out by the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and others on ransomware specifically. So there's a lot of outreach, but you know, there's so many users, there's so much vulnerability and so much risk that outreach will continue to do it, but it will not be, you know, it will not be the panacea to solving this problem, that's for sure.
Great, thank you. Another question? Everyone wants to get to the break. So I'll ask the panelists, any final words on this wonderful topic?
I'll think twice, I guess, before you click on the link. I think it's Mike's father, right? So, yeah, it's thanks for having us. I think, I mean, for me personally, it's great to come back to UConn anytime. Although ransomware is not my most favorite topic, I would say.
I wanted to add one more thing, and this one is almost silly, but there are a lot of phone calls that come in from overseas informing a person that their computer is contaminated, and they pretend to be Microsoft, and I get a number of them, and I have lots of fun with them. I waste a lot of their time and get them rather upset, but there are people that fall for that, where they actually let them into the system and let them plant something. And
just, I have heard recently that those delay tactics and things like that can be risky for you. I've heard of scenarios where the attackers then call the SWAT team on your house. So just be aware that teasing them might not be the best approach. Just hang up. Would you agree with that advice?
Yeah, you don't want to get swatted, but I haven't heard that, but that sounds like great advice to me. So generally, the tech fraud schemes is what you're referring to. It's predominantly based out of India that we've seen historically. Microsoft, in particular, has done tremendous work in this space. Most computers they're not infected at all. It's simply a pop-up that really generally targets uneducated users, or more particularly elderly. The elderly fall for this, and essentially you pay $150 or $125, not in Bitcoin, just in regular credit card or PayPal or whatever. So but it's a big business, and working with our foreign partners to try to address that is something that I know we've tried to do. You know, where that stuff is, my data is, you know, in my mind 3 weeks old since I retired 3 weeks ago. So, but there's all different kinds of innovative, creative ways to defraud people, and that's just one of many.
Question back there.
Do you gentlemen have any advice on how to block said IRS people who I owe money to with the FBI, you know, because of all the bad things I've done? Do you have any advice on how to block them?
The phone fraud specifically?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I would say,
Call block on your, I assume they call it, I don't have a home phone, so I would probably get rid of that. Not that Comcast doesn't provide wonderful services to, on
I meant specifically to the cell phone.
yeah, and I don't think I do, no.
No.
I don't, because I'm a victim of the same at
Okay.
home.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious if there was some magical box or app which you could go, no more IRS scams.
Well, so I will say one thing. I don't get those kinds of calls on my cell phone. I do on my home phone. But I wonder if, so if you're familiar with some of the techniques for masking your email address whenever you post in a public place, you'd never want to publish your phone number. I mean, it may be just people robocalling down the list, but if they are trolling sites and pulling phone numbers off of sites where you've posted, maybe that's where it's coming from. I don't know, but it's hard to say. But I think one thing is never reveal personal information to people you don't trust.
I would change your phone number too.
I haven't done that.
I mean, just change your phone number. I mean, I've changed my cell phone number multiple times.
Okay.
And it's like blocking bad IPs. Not the best way, but blocking bad phone numbers. And just it's whack-a-mole, but that's the nature of the business.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
I've actually used Google Voice number. Whenever I sign up for a credit card or any utility, I have that number forward to my other numbers so I can set up rules to filter them out and block them. So that was my approach.
That's good advice.
I'm just wondering if there's been any attempts to put pressure on Microsoft to put in some sort of anti-execution functions. It's available in enterprise versions with like App Locker, where only digitally signed applications are allowed to run. I mean, I know Apple has that on their operating system as well. Has there been any attempt to do that? Because there's some simple solutions to deal with this large problem. It won't solve everything, but.
I think the simple is a misnomer. I think we've seen is an escalation of techniques to block attackers, and then a corresponding escalation techniques to circumvent those techniques. So we put in address space randomization. I figure out how to get around that. We put in code signing. I figure out how to get around that. So I mean, there's no perfectly secure system. I agree that it's a little interesting. Microsoft is only making that feature available in their enterprise products, but that's a business decision. I'm not sure. We certainly don't have any impact on that.
Any more questions up here?
Are there any legal requirements at this point if you're a small or large business to report ransomware?
Yeah, so there's so many different, you think of all the different states, the 50 different states, all the different sectors, if you're in the healthcare space versus telecommunications space. So the fact that your data, there's one thing that the data is being potentially stolen and is lost, so your customers are impacted. This is where your data is encrypted and not necessarily exposed from it. So again, it varies by sector, it varies by state. There very well may be some type of regulatory, but it really is very particular. And I do not think, you wouldn't see, I've never seen any company who suffered a ransomware, other than the ones that are very public, like the MedStar one, for example, that you would see, the smaller attack where you paid 2 Bitcoin. I don't see the lawyers, the general counsels providing notification to the regulatory agency on that. There's attacks every day, and it's one that got remediated through the paying of a ransom.
I think we have time for at least one more question. All right, with that, I want to thank my panelists and the audience. Thank you so much. You made my job a lot easier, so a big hand for the panelists. Thanks, everyone. I believe we have a 15-minute break.